Hi everybody, welcome to this short workshop on open science and pre-registration. My name's Sam Parsons. I'm a representative from Fort and I'm looking forward to diving into some pre-registration fun with everybody. So really the aim of this workshop is to try and help develop your crush on open science. I like to think of it as just science done right, so we'll dive into several ways that you can get involved and adopt open science, open research practices within your own research, with a particular focus on pre-registration towards the end of the workshop in a future video. And one way to think about the need for openness and reproducibility in research is to think about how we can combat some of the threats to reproducible science. So this is a figure from the Manifesto for Reproducible Science from Munafo and colleagues. And in red we can see a number of threats that occur. So whether that's publication bias by not publishing null results, for example, p-hacking, or consistently testing until we find a significant effect, that kind of thing. Harking is a particularly interesting one, so hypothesizing after the results are known. Quite often this is running your tests and then thinking back to, well, that makes sense, of course we meant to do this, and yeah, this interpretation makes sense, regardless of our previous intentions. And of course, common things like low statistical power. Now, a lot of these are a little bit more specific to the quant kind of areas, but a lot of these issues can also occur in more qualitative areas. That won't be a huge focus of this particular workshop, but it's worth bearing in mind that a big part of openness and reproducibility is to combat these threats, but it's also to kind of work on the positives and what it gives our research as well. Now, when we talk about open science, we can mean a wide array of things. It's commonly used as this umbrella term to really refer to, well, anything open. You'll also quite often see open science refer to a lot of reproducibility initiatives, including things like pre-registration. Interestingly, pre-registration, although there are elements of transparency and openness to it, it's not necessarily all about the open side. There's also the reproducibility, there's the more statistical side of it as well. Now here we've got open access, which I'll talk about shortly. It's usually the first thing that people come across when we think about open science, so being able to actually access the products of research. In a separate workshop as part of ICA, you'll be hearing about FORT, so a framework for reproducible or open and reproducible research training. And that really comes under this open educational resources aspect of open science. And there's also things like open source. The more open our work is, the more it promotes things like equity, diversity, and inclusion. It allows for citizen science. And of course, things like open data and materials are part of this as well. So when we say, are you doing the open science, it can mean a wide number of things. And I would say, if there's a particular one of these that is of more interest to you, that's more applicable, try and work on the ones that are more available to you right now, as opposed to focusing or trying to do everything all at once. Now, as I say, one of the first things that people come across is open access. Ideally, we want everybody to be able to read our research. We want people to have access. Now, without going on a rant about for-profit publishers, that can often be difficult. Now, probably the most common open access option that people are aware of is a gold route. So in that particular circumstance, you would essentially pay the journal to allow you to share the work. Now, I would argue that a more sustainable model is green open access, and I find that often most people aren't aware of that. More often than not, I see questions about how we can, or how authors, how researchers can afford open access. And with green open access, you can. So the idea is that you self-archive or preprint. Quite often people will put up a preprint, so that would be your author's version of the manuscript, sometimes before, sometimes after peer review. Depends a little bit on the journal policy. But you would self-archive that yourself. And then there is an openly available version of the paper, even if the official pretty version that would be in a journal isn't available. What's really nice about this is that if you put it up on Archive or OSF, I've put several up on SciArchive, any of these platforms, they will also be indexed by things like Google Scholar. So actually when other people try and find your research, especially via Google, they will not only see the closed version, but usually they'll go pretty quickly towards the accessible version, and that's great. Now what you can do is go to the Sherpa Romeo site, linked here, and search for any journal that has a findable open access policy and find out whether they offer green, gold, and any version of open access, including things like embargoes and so on. Highly recommend looking at this before you consider or before you decide on which journal you want to submit to, because then that way you can guarantee that you're submitting to a journal that offers green access and will allow you to share your research quickly, efficiently, without fear of the publishers trying to take that open access away from you. And you can also benefit from things like the citation boost that comes from having open access. There's also so many other aspects of open science that we don't have too much time to go into, but to touch on a few. We have open materials, open data. They're two of the really common Open Science Framework, Center for Open Science badges that you'll see. Now in this case, data obviously refers to the data. Materials could be any of the materials used within the study to make it possible. Stimuli sets, things like just the general research materials. Other badges have been proposed, things like the Open Analysis or the Open Code badge. So they would allow recognition, I guess, for sharing the code that was used to run the analysis so that other researchers can use it too. Now what's especially important with sharing these research products, these research outputs, is to make them fair. So that's findable, trying to make them accessible, trying to make them interoperable so that other people can actually use them, and reusable, which often comes into things like the licenses involved. One way to do part of that is to put your materials up on the Open Science Framework, which we'll have a short tutorial about in a future video. Now it's important to look a little bit further into these FAIR principles in order to make sure that we're not only sharing our materials so that other people can find them, so that we can say, oh, it's great, it's out there, but also so that other people can really build on the shoulders of giants, so we can build on each other's work. There's nothing worse than finding an open data set in which none of the variables are labeled, for example. So things like making that usable is so vitally important. Now for more information about pre-registration, we're going to cover that in a couple of these videos within the workshop, as well as preprints, open access, data sharing, and open code and software. The UK Reproducibility Network has put out primers for each of these, and I highly recommend reading through those if you want any more information on anything that isn't covered within this workshop, or anything that is covered and you want additional information about. Now, in this workshop, in the rest of the videos, we're going to cover a brief introduction to the Open Science Framework, just to give you a bit of a walk around through some of the features that it offers. We're also going to have a look through the Open Science Framework pre-registration setup, once again to give you a bit more an idea about what pre-registration is, how it might be applicable to your own research, the benefits of it, as well as running through one of the Open Science Framework's pre-registration templates that's already been completed for an existing research project. That way you can kind of see how it might work, how you might go about completing one yourself. In the final video, we'll also have a quick Q&A with common common questions, common concerns about pre-registration itself, and the kind of responses that I can give from my experience and also from the experience of others. So, in the next video, we'll look at the Open Science Framework. If I could stop there.